Welcome to Books on Air, the podcast that tells the story behind the book. It includes insights from authors about how they compose their work, what inspires them, and what they hope you'll take away from their book. Here's your host for this episode of Books on Air, Suzanne Harris.
Welcome to the Books on Air podcast. I'm Sloan Fremont, filling in for Suzanne Harris. Joining me today is Fay Chou, author of the book Memoir of Half a Banana. In her book, Fay paints vivid pictures of postwar Taiwan and America in the 60s and compares the Chinese and American cultures through education systems, the business world, and life in general. Fay considers herself half a banana, yellow on the outside, but a bit white on the inside. Fay, welcome to the Books on Air podcast. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So I got to start out. We got to talk about the title of your book because it's so unique and so interesting. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe where the title of the book came from?
Sure. I've heard from some people that if a white person thinks like a Chinese and identifies herself or himself as Chinese, then that person can be referred to as an egg, white on the outside but yellow on the inside.
Okay.
And conversely, that person would be a banana. So I told my children about this, and they said, "No, you're not a banana. We are bananas," because they were American born. Okay. So I thought, I'll settle for half a banana then. So that's the title of the book.
Oh my gosh, I love it. That's so amazing. I love that. So unique too. And I saw this, and I love the cover of your book too. The half of the banana sitting in front of the skyline. That's really nice. I really like that.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's start out talking about your book spans your life throughout your time in both China and the U.S. So can you tell us a little bit about what it was like for you growing up in two different cultures?
Yes. At the time, I was in Arlington, Virginia with my parents. Mm-hmm. And it was a time of very simple life. And to tell you one thing, in my high school, in my junior high school, there was not one Black student in the school. Mm-hmm. So it was very different then. And in my hometown in Taiwan, the education system is also very different. The children are treated very strictly, mm-hmm. and they have full respect for their children, for their teachers and elders. Mm-hmm. And they do not raise their hands for questions or anything because they are just afraid to express themselves.
Oh, wow.
But in America, the education system is so different. Children are encouraged in every way. So I wanted to tell both the Western readers as well as Chinese readers that people can come from different cultures, different backgrounds, but it's interesting to see how they come out, how they grow up to be,
right?
And it's very interesting for me to have lived through both cultures, and I gained so much, and I want to share my experiences.
Yeah, and that is so. It's almost cultures that are on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? If we think about the education example that you just gave, right? In America, we're encouraged to ask questions. If we don't ask questions, then we almost get in trouble for that, right? For not asking questions. But right. In the Chinese culture, if you ask questions, then that's not really encouraged. So having
the teachers do encourage the children to ask questions, but nobody does because they are afraid that they will show that they are ignorant or be made fun of. So they don't do it.
Wow. I bet that makes they must get through everything really fast if nobody's asking questions. That's
true. At least it was the way when I was in school.
Right. And so you've also had a lot of business experience in both China and the U.S. And you actually worked for a Taiwan Buddhist Foundation. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about the business side of things, and maybe how those experiences shaped your life?
The businesses are also very different. And I was fortunate enough to have been an Avon lady, a restaurant owner, and I managed to wholesale import-export companies. So I've had a lot of experience in import-export and also retail as well as wholesale businesses. In East culture, there's a lot relationship to be considered. And sometimes, especially in China, if you don't have very good relationship or connection, it's hard to conduct business. But in America, it is sort of business-like. If you know the rules, you play by the rules, then the business can be conducted smoothly.
Right.
So, so in that way, it is very different.
Right, because in the U.S., there's maybe sort of universal rules that, that people are maybe used to. But in China, then do you spend time building the relationship before you ever would get to maybe a business conversation?
Yeah, sometimes that's true. Also, some people say a lot of things are conducted socially. So if you want to gain a contract or something, you need to entertain people. And with us, we didn't do too much of that.
Right. Yeah. Again, it's so interesting. Also, I think as I grew up in the U.S., and so we sometimes think where we grew up that what we know is universal. Right. But your book is showing how, the differences in the two cultures, but then also, I think you mentioned also just kind of how people come together, and at their core, people are human, right? People still have emotions. People still want happiness, right? So there are these differences, but yet underneath it all, we're all human.
Right. I want to show that even though I grew up and I had experiences vastly different than anybody else, but the emotions that I feel is the same, and everybody's emotions are the same. We react the same towards happy events as well as sad situations, and also stress and difficulties, etc. So I want to stress that even though we can be living or we are raised in different cultures and historical backgrounds, we are basically just the same human beings. So we should all get along. That's my that's the main point that I want to carry out.
Yeah, and I love that reminder. I mean, I think more than ever we need that reminder, right? That we're all human and we're all after, generally the same things. Can you tell us what were some of your favorite parts of the book that you got to write about? Maybe certain times in your life or certain experiences that you really loved reminiscing about and being able to tell those stories.
I think the main thing is about raising children. I am very proud of my children and how they grow up to be. But for myself, I was not raised that way. So I had very strict parents. And so I sometimes felt that, if I wasn't as strong as I was, I might have been pushed overboard. Because they treated me like a juvenile delinquent sometimes. And even though I was already gaining first place in my class, they still thought that, I wasn't working hard enough. So when I had my children, I did exactly the opposite. I showered them with kisses and hugs and everything. And I just supported them and encouraged them in everything. So I have very, very close relationship with my children. And I think that's my most my best accomplishment in life.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I can see just the smile on your face and how much joy that brings. That's amazing.
Right.
So in the process of writing the book and going back over, your life and thinking about things, what surprised you the most about the process?
I had a hard time deciding what to include in the book versus what to leave out, because I did not want to offend anybody. I didn't want to forget anybody.
Right.
But I had to.
Right. Yeah. And as you're thinking about, telling the stories of your life, right there's, I'm sure there were themes or different things that came up that you wanted, which went along with what your intent of the book was, to be able to share different cultures, but ultimately at the core of it, we're all humans and we're all after the same things.
Right. You mentioned also the Buddhist organization I worked for.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I discovered that the 4 years that I worked with Tzu Chi, Buddhist organization, I was very calm and very forgiving and spiritually very satisfying. Mm-hmm. Versus when I wasn't working with Tzu Chi, it was like I was influenced by the outside world, and I wasn't peaceful inside.
Right.
So I think religion still has something to do with one's life.
Yeah. Yeah. And that inner peace that you're talking about, that's something I've been personally, I think it's a lifelong journey, of course, but that's something I've really been looking at in my own life, how to soften my own internal dialogue and not let all the outside factors control me, in such a way that in a negative way. And I imagine working at a Buddhist organization. And how long were you there?
4 years.
4 years. Okay.
Right.
And so I imagine having that, I guess I would call it space, to be able to spend that time with yourself in such a maybe intimate way that many of us don't slow down and, take the time to do. I imagine that's a very life-changing process as well.
That's true. And I was vegetarian for almost 4 years too. Mm-hmm. So that really slows you down and keeps you peaceful.
Yeah. So who would you say your book would appeal to and why?
I think anybody who is interested in learning more about Chinese people, Chinese culture and history would be interested in this book. Another thing is, English is my second language, so I don't know a lot of big words in English. My book is very easy to read. Mm-hmm. And some of the reviews that I received say that, this is perfect for middle school, high school students to learn about China. Other than my life stories, there are a lot of anecdotes, and I touch upon the history background, political background. So it's both interesting and informative, I think.
Right. Yeah, especially to hear it firsthand. It's when someone who's been there and lived it versus reading it out of a history book or something where it's been written, right. by who knows. Can you give us a couple more examples about the differences maybe that you saw just living in both countries? And this could be anything, maybe something that stood out to you or something that you still look at today and think, wow, that's so different, or that's so, maybe something that the listeners might not know about.
Well, it was in the 60s that I lived with my parents in Virginia, but my father had been there in the 50s. Mm-hmm. And I remember when we traveled to smaller towns and we stopped at gas station. If you want to tip the person who puts gas in your car, mm-hmm. they would be shy and they would be surprised. to receive tips.
Yeah.
Right. It was such a time that life was much simpler.
Right. Right.
And in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, and China, people are still not used to receiving tips in present day. Mm-hmm. We would eat at the restaurant, and there is no forced 15% or 20% tip.
Right. Right. Oh, wow. So, and that's interesting because that's something here in the U.S. we're just used to it, right? We just expect it, and in China that's not the norm. It sounds like, and so people are uncomfortable with it. It sounds like. No,
they're not used to it.
Yeah,
but in fancier restaurants, bigger restaurants, they do apply the automatic 15% tip nowadays.
Oh, interesting. That's really interesting. I definitely wouldn't have thought that was, that would have been a difference, but that's so interesting. Like I said, what you were just saying about, people who want to learn about China, right? Things like this, you would never find this in a history book, right? These are real life things. And that's what makes it to me so interesting.
Uh-huh. And another thing is there is still no sales tax. So, the first time that I was purchasing something for my mother, when I was first in America, I almost didn't have enough money to buy the birthday card because there was additional sales tax.
Oh yeah! Oh my gosh! Wow, I definitely cannot imagine that. That would be wow. Right. What is something you would want the readers to know about your book?
I would like to be the bridge that bridges Chinese and Americans. Mm-hmm. So I would like to stress that as different as we see foreigners from us, we are really the same underneath the color of our skin, and so people should respect other cultures, other people, no matter of their nationalism or race. I think that's what I want people to take away.
Yeah. And I love that reminder. And it reminds me of, times that I've traveled out of the country and wherever it was. And when you're the traveler, for me at least, and everybody I've talked to, friends and people that I traveled with, it's almost like we expect wherever we're going to to be accustomed to us, right? To speak English or to, cater to whatever we're used to. But obviously that's not the case. That's just mentally, what we maybe have in mind when we go somewhere new. But I think being able to open our minds and to see that, like, just because we've always done it this way in our culture, or just because culture says this is the way to do it, when we start to look at other cultures and we meet other people from other countries, maybe in our own day-to-day lives, there is so much, and I just know this from traveling out of the country so many times, there's so much to learn and so much to open your mind to, if you're willing to do that and get out of your own maybe expectations, or get out of your own head, or maybe a box that you've put a particular idea or thought in. There's just so much you can learn and grow from so easily. And it's so impactful, I found. Right.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. And I love that your book has the message of just the reminder of being able to, that we're all the same on the inside.
Right. I try to make it as humorous as possible, also to make it interesting reading.
Right. Right. And that's a good way to learn, right? Do something funny. It seems like those kinds of things we remember pretty easily. Right. My guest this week has been Fay Chou, author of Memoir of Half a Banana. And Fay, again, congratulations on the success of your book and being able to tell your story in a humorous way, but also in a way that shows people two different cultures, and maybe hopefully gives the readers a different idea of maybe how they thought one culture was versus the other.
Yes. Thank you very much.
You can find out more about Fay's book, Memoirs of Half a Banana, on Amazon. I'll link to Fay's book in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. You've been listening to the Books on Air podcast, brought to you on webtalkradio.net. You can also hear this podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. I'm Sloan Fremont, and I hope you'll join us for the next Books on Air podcast. Remember, you never know who's going to be here, and you never know what we're going to talk about. Thank you so much for listening.